just after midnight in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And you are now tuned in to the Comedy Clubhouse. That's right, it is now time for the Comedy Clubhouse. I am your host, Club President Powerman, and what I do, in case you've never heard the show before, and if you haven't, well, where have you been all my life, Edmonton? Where have you been all my life? If you've never heard the show before, what it is, it's a comedy radio show where I, yours truly, Powerman on CJSR FM 88.5, play comedy clips, talk about Edmonton's local stand-up comedy scene locally, nationally, globally, and intergalactically. Oh my goodness, there are some great up-and-comers on Rylon 7, and we might talk about them in a century or two. But right now, I am here to tell you about Edmonton's local comedy scene. If at any point in the show you have questions, comments, or concerns, the email here is comedy@cjsr.com. That's comedy@cjsr.com. And the phone lines are open at 780-492-2577. That's 780-492-CJSR. We are going to have a special guest joining us in just a little bit, and I'll tell you about your featured interview and co-host in just a little bit. But first, let me tell you about what's happening in the Edmonton comedy community. Oh my goodness, it's a great week we're having here. Like I told you 2 weeks ago and 2 weeks before that, Edmonton now has 4 comedy clubs, with the opening of the Yuck Yucks in the Century Casino right there on Fort Road by Belvedere LRT station. And what can I say? Of all the clubs, I mean, they're not schlepping. They're not just phoning it in. They have got TV's John Doerr from the John Doerr television program, one of the top-rated television programs on the Comedy Network. So John Doerr is actually in Edmonton all week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. That's at the Century Casino on Fort Road. Not to be outdone, just up the street, the Laugh Shop. Oh, has got one of my most favorite and inspirational acts, Mr. Paul the Waltz Fiend. Well, he's in great shape, and so is his act. So you know what? Those are both great shows you can check out on the north side. On the west side, again, great comedy. Jimmy Schubert, who's been all over the place, and you've seen him on Comedy Central, you've seen him on Just for Laughs, you've seen him everywhere. He's going to be at the comic strip, Rick Bronson's The Comic Strip, in West Edmonton Mall in the heart of Bourbon Street. And that, of course, that's West Edmonton Mall, north side, Century Casino on the north side. That brings us to the one part of the city we don't actually, get down to too much, because I take the bus. Some comics roll BMW, some roll ETS. But you know what? This week at the Comedy Factory on Gateway Boulevards, nestled right in Gateway Lanes, they're very proud to announce Mr. Bob Angeli, who has been a fixture of the Edmonton comedy community for well over 20 years, has performed, booked, and you know what? Changed the landscape of Edmonton, Alberta, and in fact Canada. He's worked with such famous comics as Mitch Hedberg, and he's going to be telling us a little bit about that later. But first, I want to tell you, before we welcome Mr. Bob Angeli, who's performing again Thursday, Friday, and Saturday at the Comedy Factory on the south side. This is the Comedy Clubhouse, and I got the swear jar out. We're uncensored, just like good comedy should be. For that reason, our friends down the road at the CRTC want little Susie to tell you what might happen.
Warning, this program contains language that some listeners may find offensive. Listener discretion is advised. Stick your fingers in your ears in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And that's, you know what, that's how I feel when I get to talk to our next guest. And you know what? He has been influential in the careers of countless comedians. Some of the big Canadian comedians you've seen on television have passed through the Comedy Factory, have passed through the big booking pen of Mr. Bob Angeli. Bob, hello. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. And Powerman, I wanted to extend my thanks to you for the support that you've given us for 3 years. That's right, Edmonton. Powerman and CJSR's comedy show have been airing for over 3 years. I'm honored.
Thank you very much. And you know what? Not to be outdone, the Comedy Factory has been booking venues for well over 20.
That is correct. We just reached our 20-year milestone on May the 1st, and I thank you for recognizing that, Powerman. That's doing a little bit of homework, and yes, we are very proud of that.
Now, I'm not going to jump right into it, but I'm going to give a little taste of what's to come. Just like a good MC, we'll tell you a little bit of your headliner before they get to the meat and potatoes. I spoke 2 weeks ago on the show, and even before that, of the interesting times we're living in. What was the new Yuck Yucks opening up? What was the Laugh Shop previously being part of that franchise? Delving off and starting their own business model. What was a few years back, about 5 years back, I think it was, Rick Bronson opened up a rival club.
Absolutely.
And it's very interesting times and that's, shakes things up. It's like an anthill. Shake it up and see where the ants dig.
You made a good point, Powerman, that especially with today's economy and all the negative vibe around, people spending or their spending habits, and it's interesting that at the most volatile time in the market that we have another comedy club opening. So it's telling you that comedy is on the forefront. People want to laugh. They want to rid some of their challenges, hurdles, and stress. So we'll see. Will time dictate whether we can afford 4 comedy clubs?
Yeah, well, and I often hear said that comedy is a recession-proof industry because in our darkest times, we need to laugh and we need to drink.
Absolutely.
And thankfully, you are licensed at the Comedy Factory. Now, that's on Gateway Boulevard in,
34th Avenue.
34th Avenue.
Yeah, on the south side. We've never moved venue, and we're kind of proud of that, too.
That's excellent. Now, I was saying just a moment ago how, of course, the Laugh Shop left the Yuck Yucks franchise and started their own business model. Rick Bronson, who was a former Yuck Yucks headliner, left that franchise and opened up his own place in a former Yuck Yucks location.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, Yuck Yucks, of course, has had several locations through Edmonton, and we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. But before the Laugh Shop became the Laugh Shop, before Rick Bronson opened the comic strip, before any of all that happened, well, the second comedy club to ever open in Edmonton, and maybe that's incorrect, I guess we'll talk about that, but the second comedy club in Edmonton that is still open, actually, you know what? I think the way it happened, you're Edmonton's longest running comedy club.
Well,
it just occurred to me.
Yeah, Powerman, you're right. I mean, Yuck Yucks was established here for many years, and they moved from the Point to West Edmonton Mall to Londonderry location. And at the time, I believe their marketing strategy was, we're the only club in town, and the city of Edmonton will follow us. Our fans will follow us. So at the time, there was a great opportunity to consider a second venue. And that's how the concept for the Comedy Factory came along. And then I believe Ricky Bronson decided that, there is possible now for a third club because the the second location of Yuck Yucks at West Edmonton Mall became available. And I think Ricky saw an opportunity. And he's made a viable thrust out there and established himself as one of the premier comedy clubs in North America, let alone Canada.
Yeah, definitely. Now, we are going to, now in the past on this show, I have spent a lot of time talking about the most recent developments and how, just to be concise, how Yuck Yucks was in West Edmonton Mall. And the owners of Yuck Yucks decided that they could build a room to suit at Londonderry Mall. So they vacated their rent at West Edmonton Mall and moved to Londonderry, where they knocked down a Walmart and they built a room to suit. It was shortly thereafter Mr. Rick Bronson started paying rent at the old place. The mall was happy to rent to him. He renovated the old Yuck Yucks room at West Edmonton Mall, opened the the comic strip, and all this time the Comedy Factory was there. And Londonderry Mall, being a Yuck Yucks, a partnership between Toronto Corporation and a locally owned Edmonton Corporation. The Edmonton Corporation went their own way. You know, there's two sides to the story, and we're not getting into that right now. But then, of course, now the Yuck Yucks, of course, is open in the Century Casino on Fort Road, having 4 locations total. And I've given a lot of time to that. We're not going to be talking a lot about that. But you know what? That was what happened years before it. The Point was before my time. So we're going to open it up, and we're actually going to get a little history of Edmonton comedy from, well, a man who's been in Edmonton comedy longer than anyone else, because even the second longest person in Edmonton comedy, of course, Bill Robinson, owner of the Laugh Shop franchise, was in Calgary.
That is correct.
When Bob Angeli was starting out in Edmonton. So, if anyone is qualified to tell us the story of Edmonton comedy, it's Bob Angeli.
Well, I appreciate that. I will try to be as accurate as I can. A lot of changes occurred in the last 20 years. But the point you made so succinctly, Powerman, is the fact that, yes, Edmonton is now supporting 4 comedy clubs, and I truly believe that Edmonton is big enough. If they're managed properly and the talent keeps producing, I believe Edmonton will support the 4 clubs.
Now, Bob, what happened years ago? I understand that Edmonton, it was the mid-'80s, the first time comedy ever came to Edmonton, Alberta, Canada.
That is correct.
And that wasn't even at a comedy venue. That was at a music venue.
That is correct. Also, one of the most established institutions for live entertainment was a venue called the Sidetrack Cafe. And they prided themselves in having a 7-night live venue building.
Entertainment 7 nights a week.
Correct. And they wanted to diversify their portfolio, so they included comedy, which was one of the hottest properties in the mid-'80s.
Yeah, and of course, I think anyone who's old enough and who had the channels will remember A&E's Evening at the Improv, and the big explosion there. Big names like George Carlin. On television,
Richard Pryor,
Steve Martin,
Lenny Bruce.
Yeah, all of them really coming into fruition. And our town, of course, often years behind any big movement, was not in this case. The Sidetrack Cafe was bringing in big name headliners.
Absolutely. I think what happened was, with the names that you just brought forth, they opened the doors for comics like The Next Wave, which would have been the Jay Leno's, Jerry Seinfeld's, Steinberg's, the Tim Allens, Ray Romano's, and so on and so forth. And then comedy became mainstream. So that not only, if you wanted to do a live comedy venue, you did not necessarily have to just go to Vancouver, Toronto, or LA to get comics.
And of course, that is where comics were being flown in from. There was comics from Vancouver, LA, Toronto, and New York were coming to Edmonton to work at the Sidetrack.
Correct, and for a one-night venue. And then if there was another popular venue, say in Red Deer, Fort McMurray, Grand Prairie, or Calgary, they would piggyback those dates for those particular headliners to make it worthwhile.
Now, it was when the Sidetrack opened up to comedy, and this, of course, is not me talking, this is what Bob told me. It wasn't long before they got sponsorship from a radio station that's not on anymore, K97.
Yeah, or K-Light, K96. K-Light.
Yeah, began advertising, and you were one of the many local people who went down and started doing a little comedy time, broke your teeth in, got your tongue wet, just before some of those big names.
That is right. Monday night was the opportunity for local people to work on their craft, similar to some of the open mic nights that we have at the local comedy clubs in the city now, and or the pub flair for amateur night or open mic night where a local talent can go and work on their craft.
Now, it's a well-known fact that the Sidetrack was a popular and successful venue right up until about 4 years ago when they had to close their doors because they had to move. Now, the Sidetrack, it was a booming comedy night, and it wasn't long before another venue opened up.
That is correct, Powerman. The Comedy Bowl had been already operating for a couple of years on Monday nights when Yuck Yucks moved into town in the mid-'80s during that comedy explosion.
Yeah, and in that explosion, a couple little pieces of shrapnel, the Grand Hotel.
That is correct.
Now, where was the Grand Hotel? I'm not even familiar with where that was in the city.
It's downtown, just a couple of blocks south of the Greyhound bus depot.
Now, what is it now?
It's still called the Grand Hotel, but the venue downstairs never really took off, so they just sealed it up, and it's been a storage space ever since.
Now, it's all hearsay and conjecture, but I think that place might have been called Jester's, briefly.
That is correct, and it was run by a comedian out of Vancouver who saw a tremendous potential because of the explosion at a comedy club called Punchlines in Gastown in Vancouver.
Now, actually, just around that time, the mid-'80s, Punchlines opened up in Vancouver.
Correct.
One of Canada's jewel cities. Right about that time, Mr. Mark Breslin opened up a comedy club called Yuck Yucks in Toronto, the other side of the universe as far as Canada's concerned. And that was what was happening. As far as Jester's goes, my understanding is it's show business. A very talented comedian started to get it going. He wasn't really great with the numbers. His numbers people, for whatever reason, he couldn't make the numbers crunch.
Correct.
So Jester's was not a long-term investment. However, just as Jester's was shutting down, and as Breslin was opening a Yuck Yucks in Toronto, and a man named Johnson was opening a Punchlines in Vancouver, a man named Bill Robinson opened up a place called Snickers in Calgary.
Correct. This all happened at about the same time, the comedy explosion in the mid-'80s.
And at this time, for many of the comics who might be listening, there was no national chain of comedy clubs. There was one Yuck Yucks, one Punchlines, one Snickers. There was, of course, the Sidetrack Comedy Night, which, after the Jesters could make the numbers work, was Edmonton's only comedy night.
That is correct. It was the only regular comedy venue.
And again, Bill Robinson, to mirror what happened at Edmonton, was a businessman who was working with comics, and again, they couldn't make the numbers work until Bill Robinson and Mark Breslin, who was a comic and a businessman, they met
Connected.
minds. They met minds, and soon Bill Robinson was opening, in correlation with Mark Breslin, the very first Yuck Yucks outside of Toronto, the second club right here in Edmonton.
That is correct. Back in the mid-'80s. And, of course, with the comedy boom and Yucks already having somewhat of a name in the industry, the comedy market and the club at the point took off like a rocket. They were opened originally just the Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights, and they were lined up around the block, Powerman. It was unbelievable success.
And how long was it until, and of course the Snickers was an unsuccessful franchise in Calgary. Bill Robinson opened a Yuck Yucks here. How long before he opened a Yuck Yucks in Calgary?
I believe after the success of Edmonton, Calgary was on board 6 months later.
Excellent.
At the Blackfoot Inn, and also a tremendous success from the get-go.
And there is still comedy at the Blackfoot Inn if anybody's listening on CJSR.com.
That is correct.
But of course, that is the laugh shop, but that's happened recently. We're getting the history of Edmonton.
Yes.
Now, it wasn't long, I understand, after the Yuck Yucks opened, and of course, at this time, there was the Yuck Yucks, there was the Sidetrack still, there was a number of one-nighters and some road work.
Yes, and I believe, Powerman, that there was some rumors at the peak of comedy in the late 80s, going into the early 90s, that Bud Friedman, the improv impresario.
Yeah, he owned now, and then of course in America there was the Improv.
The Improv. And because of the popularity and the growth of comedy, he went on record as saying he was going to open 3 comedy clubs in Canada. One being in Toronto, one in Vancouver, the third in West Edmonton Mall. So because of that rumor, talk on the street was Yuck Yucks was going to try and refrain from a newcomer, so they decided to open a second branch of the Yuck Yucks chain in Chinatown. So now you've got 2 Yuck Yucks in Edmonton. But what was happening was the same headliners would just circulate between the original club and the downtown club. So a lot of fans were going, well, we saw that guy at that location last month and the same performer at this club this month. So it didn't quite catch on. But the original Yuck Yucks was still packing them in, still lined up around the block.
All right. And it wasn't long after that, Bob, you saw some opportunities and you made a move. You were the very first person to ever, and of course, Yuck Yucks became a chain.
Yes. Well, what happens also with a one gun in town, so to speak, is that they can monopolize both the customer and the talent. So right from the get-go, I thought to myself, I didn't want to be pigeonholed working for one exclusive operator because it wouldn't allow me the flexibility. So I decided that for my own personal agenda, I needed to just do my own thing, which basically became the Comedy Factory. And then I saw a need for independent comics to have a voice, and then for a lot of talent and customers to have an option.
All right, and of course we're gonna talk a little bit more. Yuck Yucks, of course, was a one gun solution. The solution to that, of course, that's not how we run CJSR. Actually, we actually have annual general meetings all the time right here at CJSR, and you can actually get involved if you really want to. We'll be right back after this. That's right, Electro Prolapse with DJ Cooch is coming up right after the Comedy Clubhouse, right at about 2 a.m. But right now, we're going to do a public service announcement. And we're back, actually. This is still the Comedy Clubhouse. It's 88.5, very first on your FM dial, 104 kilohertz, or something close to that. I don't know, go to 104, flick around your kilohertz, with the uncensored comedy radio show, the best university station radio show in this market. No other show compares, because every other show sucks, as does every other host. And we're back with Mr. Bob Angeli, owner, operator, creator, and headliner this week of the Comedy Factory on Gateway Boulevard. Bob,
nice to be back, Powerman.
So we were just discussing how it all started in Edmonton. The Yuck Yucks opened up. They had a couple locations. It wasn't long before you started independently booking your own things outside of the Yuck Yucks family.
Well, what I noticed is there was a demand. Like everything else, there's always a competitor or an option. And so that's right, Powerman. When the comedy boom exploded as it did, there was such a demand for talent comedy venues right across the province and Western Canada. So whenever we promoted a comedy concept, it was well received and booked right away. And what we tried to do was, once again, give everybody an option, both the fans, the venues, and the comics themselves.
Yeah, and of course, that was something new. At this point, Yuck Yucks was, again, the only gun in town.
Right, and hot, Powerman, very hot.
Selling out every show.
Absolutely.
And whether or not being the only gun in town was a good thing or a bad thing, or whether or not you should have stuck with him or leave, the history is what it was. You left, forged out on your own, and that was a little over 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, that what we decided was a venture on our own, an unknown territory, and yeah, it's 20 years ago.
And things really don't change, do they?
No, they don't.
No.
And now you've got younger pioneers doing exactly the same thing that we did 20 years ago and making a success of themselves. Who would have thought 20 years ago that there would be 4 comedy clubs, Powerman? And as you know from the generation of comics you came from, some very gifted and talented people, including yourself, and a large contingency of new faces and new talents.
And you know what? Goodness gracious. Great balls of fire. If I had more than 2 hours, if I had several hours, if I could go for 24 hours, we could get into a lot of the great details about what it was like and, quite frankly, how hilarious it is that history repeats. I mean, the more I talk to Bob, the more I see the exact same things happening. For example, the Yuck Yucks seeing that there was some competition opening up a second club. The same thing's happening. The Laugh Shop is opening up on White Avenue very soon.
Of course.
They have 2 clubs. I mean, it's astounding at how history repeats itself, but we don't got that kind of time. Suffice it to say, long story slightly shorter, Bob Angeli left the fold of the Yuck Yucks, opened up his own name of club, didn't open the doors quite yet, but became an independent booker and started booking things all over Alberta and northern BC. You name the town, Bob has sent comics there over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And
we were the chuck wagon, or the wagon train of comedy at the time, you bet.
Yeah, you know what? And there was so much land, Bob laid a stake. And, you know, for a long time, he was public enemy number 1 on the Yuck Yucks radar. Because for a very long time, Yuck Yucks had a pretty good hold on the best and brightest of Canadian comedy talent.
You bet, Powerman. And a lot of comics, sadly, didn't have a choice or an option. They were pigeonholed into that, Yuck Yucks concept. And good or bad, there's no animosity here. It's a choice.
And it's very interesting. And you know what? The more I study it, the more I laugh. But the way you bumped heads with Yuck Yucks, one would even call it the war with Yuck Yucks, which I think is a draw. That's neither here nor there. Let's talk about the meat and potatoes of what you did, putting Yuck Yucks aside.
Well, one of the first, points of agenda was to make sure we had enough venues to give comics a chance at diversifying their craft and making a living. So our first point of interest was making sure we had viable tours, and then from there it became an important fact that yes, we can make a living as independents. And so as the venues grew, so did the talent. And as you pointed out, Powerman, a lot of interesting comics came on board.
Now, you started as a comic.
Yes.
Then you became a booker, and that took up a lot of your time. What do you like to do better?
Of course, standing in front of crowds and receiving that applause and that love, that instantaneous gratification for something that you're doing, spontaneously on the spot, of course, is more gratifying. But the fact that we've had a viable business and making a living at it for 20 years is a personal achievement that I'm very proud of. I would imagine that any comic who's reached any milestone, whether it be 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, is a personal achievement that deserves acknowledgement. So, Powerman, I still have a passion for the comedy itself, but I've been very fortunate that I'm a better businessman than I am a performer.
Now, there were a good number of years, about 15 years, where you doing a lot of booking, a lot of one-nighters, promotion, and then that was going so well, you opened up your own comedy club, a brick-and-mortar place.
Absolutely. What was interesting is so many of our performers were being approached by audience members going, "You guys are so funny. You're so entertaining. Where can we see you? Do you have your own room?" And at that time, of course, there was only one comedy club, as we all know.
Yeah.
And so an opportunity came available, and I started to pound the pavement looking for the right room. Because as we both know as performers, the room is as important as the talent itself. Because the room needs character. It needs some kind of atmosphere. So we looked around, and we tried to find something on White Avenue, on Jasper Avenue, on 124th Street, somewhere around the artsy-fartsy locations around town. And then this opportunity came up in an entertainment center, Gateway, because it gave the fans an opportunity not just to come for comedy, but if they wanted a night of entertainment.
Now, what do you mean by entertainment center?
It provides ample options of entertainment like bowling, billiards, laser tag.
Pool, arcade.
Absolutely. Golf, indoor golf, basketball. So when people came,
I think now, I don't know, it was at the time there was even a children's dance studio upstairs.
That is correct. Yeah. That is correct. So it offered people options to make a night of it. Because one of the things we competed against, Powerman, is the fact that if you had a choice, you were going to go out with your date, your better half, Yuck Yucks or the comedy venue was inside a mall.
Yeah.
So people could go inside. If it was minus 30, they could go for a walk or entertain themselves by going to one of the local restaurants right on Bourbon Street.
Yeah.
So the advantage to that comedy club was the fact that it was indoor and there were options for the public to entertain themselves.
And of course, there was walk-up. People go there to buy shoes. They go there to get a bite on Bourbon Street. There is comedy. That's how we should spend our night.
Absolutely, Powerman.
The same thing is true. They go out, let's play a game of pool. Oh my goodness, there's a comedy club here. Who's here? Well, let's go.
Let's go and have some fun. Absolutely.
And of course, again, the way history repeats, it's very reminiscent of the sidetrack. 7 nights a week, entertainment, let's add comedy. We're an entertainment center. Let's add comedy.
Right. Let's give our customer every reason to keep coming back to our venue.
Exactly.
So the comedy club became a variety of entertainment, not just pigeonholed to one form of entertainment.
And let's be very clear here. The way we're talking about it, you might think, oh, the Comedy Factory is one room has pool, one room. The Comedy Factory is an entire level.
That is correct. It's just one comedy club within a complex of entertainment.
There is one floor of comedy club, and then there's some pool tables. So really, the comedy club is the comedy club and the bowling are each half of the place.
That is correct.
And there's some other things.
They're encompassed in one building, but they're separate from one another.
That's right.
So you can go and enjoy your evening in the comedy club, have yourself some nachos, some chicken wings, have yourself a glass of wine or a beer, enjoy the comedy, and then after the show is over, if you decide you're out for another evening's entertainment, you can partake in, as you pointed out, the pool tables, the basketball, the darts, or bowling.
And of course, in Edmonton, that seems to be a common occurrence, entertainment, because of course, the comic strip is in a mall.
Correct.
Edmonton Mall. Londonderry Mall hosts the Laugh Shop.
Absolutely.
Of course, the Comedy Factory is in an entertainment center. And the new Yuck Yucks is in the Century Casino, which they have TVs, they have, table games.
The gaming.
And there's also an actual big showroom that they have such bands as, I forget who was just here, maybe Foreigner or something. They actually have...
Gino Vanelli was just there. Brooks and Dunn.
Yeah, Brooks and Dunn.
So, BJ Thomas is coming. You bet.
And I think it's fair to say, not that your venue's not the greatest venue I've ever seen. Yuck Yucks also is in an entertainment venue now. And I heard tell, and I don't know... who told me this, but I also heard tell that Yuck Yucks might actually bring in some big names and use the 500-seat venue next door.
Absolutely.
So we'll have to keep our eye open for that. But here you are. It opened up in 2000 or 01.
That is correct.
Yeah, 2000.
We'll be 9 years old on Labor Day.
That's September.
Oh, we're very proud of that.
Excellent. So you opened up the club, and how did that change? How did that change your business model? Did it become easier or harder? Because now you have to fill a club, But then again, you have a club.
Absolutely. You hit it on both sides of the coin, Powerman. Easier because now we had a venue that bigger names, better comics would come for. Because most comics want to work a venue like a comedy club where, the focus is on the comedy. It's not like a one-night venue where the comics are competing with, say, for example, VLTs, guys coming in, not necessarily for comedy, to try and pick up some of the local talent. They're not competing with lights going on in the corner or some form of gaming, which would be the pool or, say, a pinball machine and or some screen televising some sport somewhere on the planet. So it became easier from that standpoint, but you hit it on the nose. It made it more difficult because now I'm responsible for filling those 200 seats, whereas before as a performer, if someone called us to book an event, it was their responsibility to get the numbers in. So it became much more challenging and then much more rewarding. As we both know, the bigger the challenge, the bigger the reward.
And and for our listeners who've never done stand-up comedy, and some of our listeners who I know are stand-up comics, let me just take a brief aside to say, sometimes there's nothing you can do as a comic. For example, I've been on the road for you, Bob, where it's a new venue and they really don't know how to run a comedy room. I go in there and, it's not my fault. Good
point.
I go in and they don't have the sound equipment you've recommended they get, or they haven't put up posters and there's 5 people there. And at that point, I say, well, I've been paid and this is not going to be on me. These people might not have a good time, but I'm going to do my best to entertain these 5 people. I have been hired to talk for half an hour, and sometimes you just got to talk for half an hour.
That's right, Powerman. The most common error amongst the one night...
So it's harder to be a booker because it is your fault. As
Sure.
a comic, if I walk into your club and there's no one there, it's not my fault you didn't sell out.
That is
It's
correct.
not up to me to sell the tickets.
That's right.
However, if anything goes wrong at the Comedy Factory, well, you're the one who didn't get the right mic. You're the one who hired the not funny guy.
Correct.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's a number of variables that we are accountable for, which makes it.
Like, for example, that comes to mind. Actually, one of the greatest comedians I think who's ever lived had a chance to work for you and didn't really knock the hinges off the joint.
Yeah, Powerman, expand on that. I'm sure your listeners would really be interested in that.
Well, I don't know. Hey, listeners, have you heard of a little man called Mitch Hedberg? Well, Mitch Hedberg in the 90s, really before he became the long-hair cake eater that we all know and love, worked for Mr. Bob Angeli. So how did you meet Mr. Mitch Hedberg, Bob?
Like most comics of that generation, of that era, contacted me either through word of mouth, because technology wasn't as advanced in those days as it is today. But through word of mouth, mainly he got a hold of me, said he was a touring comedian, would like to come up to Canada, and came up and did a tour. And like most comics, I do not recall if Mitch had been up to this part of Canada touring before. He came up, got his feet wet, and by all standards, most comedians will get rebooked not just because I like them, the venues have to like them.
Now, of course, comedy has changed so much over the last 20 years, and if we had hours and hours to talk about it, there's so many things I would ask you.
Oh, of course.
We're definitely going to have you back, and of course, now's a good time to mention that the next 2 weeks, that'll be, I believe, the 16th, we're going to have Rob Pugh and Marty McLean are going to be in studio.
Oh, wow.
And that's just a little plug. I'll tell you again later, audience. But back in the day, like now, if somebody wants to come work for you, where everyone knows everybody, and they send you a tape, they send you a DVD. They
Correct.
send you a link to their website where they have got a showcase 25 minutes. You look at it and you decide if you're going to... But back in the day, video cameras were so expensive. If you weren't Bill Cosby...
It was word of mouth.
You didn't even have a Betamax tape to show.
Exactly.
So, Mitch Hedberg called you up, and we're going to hear from him in just a second and hear how he did. Mitch Hedberg called you up and said, Mitch Hedberg, I'd like to work. you had to, just like everybody, I've never met the guy, I haven't heard if he's shit or good.
Powerman, we discussed this temporarily before we went on air. Faith.
Yeah.
We have to have faith as bookers in the talent, and as we both know as performers, we have to have faith in ourselves that everything will work out. Faith in our craft, faith in our writing ability, and then, of course, finally in our performing ability. So I had faith that Mitch Hedberg would do an adequate job.
Now Mitch Hedberg came in, and
he came for 2 weeks.
Now, tell me about the first time you worked with Mitch Hedberg, then we're going to hear a little Mitch Hedberg.
Well, Mitch, we agreed on a fee, expenses, hotel rooms, and his performance monies. And then he went out on tour for 10 days. And generally, as a booker, you do not get responses from the venues unless it's really bad.
Or really good.
But that's very, very rare, Powerman, that a venue will call you when it's really good, unless he's a very good customer and you've built a really good relationship.
Now, I know you don't have your books in front of you, but do you recall, if not exactly where you sent him in the venues, which direction you sent him? North, south?
Well, in those days, our tours were pretty extensive.
What kind of places were you booking?
We were looking at the Red Deer property called the Silver Buckle, which was a country bar venue that seated around 400. He'd go up to places like the Quality Inn in Fort McMurray, a tough bar that would seat around 200. He'd go to places like the Trumpeter in Grand Prairie, a nice lounge setting that sat around 120 at capacity. So he was doing some of these, by layman's standards, the country bumpkin rooms.
Yeah, well, what we would call now oil rigger rooms at that time,
Absolutely.
Rooms, whatever.
Correct.
Mitch Hedberg had a very unique style.
Very, very new and very unique to this kind of setting.
What did the venue say about him?
Powerman, I can't repeat some of the expletives that were used, but predominantly the owner said, Bob, he's a nice man, he's a good man, he's just not funny, please don't send him back.
Now, to be fair, this was 1990.
Early 90s. I'd say 92, 93, 94.
So nonetheless, he was just starting out, so maybe the places didn't get him, or maybe he just sucked and he got funny later. Either way, very unique, very alternative comic. I can't believe we've gone this long without playing a clip, but Bob Angeli is captivating. So here is the man who came up to work for Bob Angeli. This is an appearance he did on Canadian television. This is On the Edge, Mitch Hedberg, just for laughs, on the Comedy Clubhouse. Ladies and gentlemen, comedy fans, that was Mitch Hedberg.
Funny guy.
Who, people are surprised to hear that he came through Alberta in the 90s. People have a stigma that we're not funny, we're not good enough to have funny guys like him, but we are.
Oh, we certainly are. We were blessed with Mitch, not just once, Powerman, twice.
That's right, and Mitch is actually outlived by, he passed away a couple years back, and I'll always remember it was March 31st, because I remember I heard about it the day after. I heard he died yesterday, but I heard that on April 1st, and I remember thinking, I don't believe it. Yeah, right. And then I heard it again on the 2nd, and I Googled it, and it was true.
Yeah.
So he died a couple years back, but we actually took his brain, and we put it into a robot. And that robot loves to swear. So, robot, do you want to say something about swearing?
Warning. This program contains language that some human listeners may find offensive. Listener discretion is advised. Stupid human beings.
That's right, and we're going to talk a little bit about Mitch Hedberg in a second, but this actually seems like a perfect time to talk about profanity and how you are the only booker and only club around here who has a F-bomb-free place.
Well, that kind of happened by accident too, Powerman, because at the time that comedy was starting to peak, not just because it had been around for some time, but the economy started to shift in the mid-'90s. It started to happen about 93, that led into 94, 95, and 96. Some interesting variables started to change in the economy and people's attitudes towards live entertainment, because once the economic structure changed, so did people's spending habits and people's attitudes. People were getting older. The general demographic of our audiences was getting older. The baby boomers started to change. And every time we started doing performances, because comedy had reached its peak, people had seen and heard it all, more or less.
Yeah.
Because the ranges from the Jay Leno's who and Jerry Seinfeld's who did smarter, cleaner performances, and then the other extreme being the Sam Kinnisons,
the Bill Hicks,
exactly.
Lenny
Good.
Bruce.
Exactly. Lenny Bruce, Richard Pryor, Eddie Murphy styles of comedy. People had been introduced to all extremes. So people's attitudes and their thinking patterns changed towards comedy, and a lot of people would come to us as performers and go, again, that you're funny and you're a cleaner version of the stand-up that we're used to. Again, can we come and see you?
And what you're saying, I don't think it was clearly illustrated, is that you were performing less vulgar. People were coming up to you and saying you're a cleaner version.
Correct.
Stand-up comedy.
Correct. And people would say, thank you so much for the show. And it wasn't necessarily Powerman that Bob Angeli was the lone performer, because I've always said this, that it's a team effort. No matter how many comics are on the venue, it takes the opening act, the guest spots, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, and then your closing act to bring that audience from a standstill to a standing crescendo. So it's always been a team effort. So a lot of times we would get this feedback that, hey, it was a cleaner, funner show than what we're formally been introduced to, and there was no live venue that catered to that audience. So as my performances extended into colleges, universities, special events, and then, of course, the corporate market, I noticed, hey, there's an opportunity and a need for something cleaner. Not better, not smarter. We all have our own version of our sensibilities to laughter. So I just thought, if there's ever an opportunity, let's explore that. So you're right, Powerman. One of the agendas at the Comedy Factory when we opened the club was, let's try something a little cleaner. So we don't allow any F-bombs.
Yeah, and since we do here, what he's saying is at his club he would prefer if you did not say fuck.
Correct.
Also, I've been instructed by you not to say the C word, cunt. However, I do have special permission from you to say twat, because I came to you once with a really good cunt joke. And I said, listen, my joke is George Bush is a cunt. And you said, oh, pal, buddy, hey, the factory, no C-bombs. And then I said, can I say George Bush is a twat? And you're like, okay, for you, you can say twat.
Well, you see, it's been
I'll always remember that day. Well,
that's a good memory, Powerman. And just note that there are audiences that are accepting of that. And I'm not restricting the comics per se. I'm just asking them for 45 minutes in our venue to refrain from F-bombs and exploring and pushing the envelope.
Yeah.
But funny is funny.
And there's 3 places where they can push the envelope. But now back to the topic at hand. We've talked about how you're F-bombs, and someone who works clean and weird, Mitch Hedberg, came up, worked for you. They really didn't understand him in the, let's call a spade, the hicky little towns of Alberta and northern BC. But you know what? You were not fast to judge, and you see the best in everybody. You're an optimist. So, Mitch Hedberg, how did you guys part companies after that first time? After that first time.